Hi, Holifrog here. If you've followed my channel for a while, you may have noticed I don't like overplaying the ability of Paladin tanks in general. There are some very real downsides to a Paladin tank that I don't think should be ignored, but this is certainly not true for every boss in the game. One boss where I really think Paladins get to shine is the Nefarian fight for multiple reasons. Warriors are typically the default go-to tank for most guilds on any boss, and while they do great in every scenario, Nefarian included, there are some actual drawbacks on this boss that Paladin tanks don't have to deal with. Let's look at what they are. Nefarian, as I'm sure you all know, have multiple class call abilities, one for each class. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will talk about the ones that are relevant for us. First off, Nefarian's Paladin call puts an improved version of Blessing of Protection on Nefarian. That means any physical ability is prevented from landing on Nefarian for the duration of the call. While this call is up, warriors are left doing very little threat, as their only ability they're really able to use is Sunder Armor, Battle Shout and Demo Shout. They also get to use these abilities less frequently, as they can't land white hits to generate rage, and rely only on rage generated from getting hit by Nefarian's melee attacks. For most guilds, this isn't much of an issue. Warrior tanks already output solid threat, especially in this raid tier, and a tank running Fury Prot will have access to Death Vision and Rage to really push the threat up. Worst case, if the raid's casters are about to overtake the tank, the DPS can just stop the damage until the call ends. The real problem a lot of guilds run into here is the warrior call. When this call is up, warriors are stuck in Berserker stance. This means they not only lose to 10% damage reduction from defensive stance, they will also take an additional 10% damage from being in Berserker stance. On top of this, the warrior call increased the damage taken by an additional 30%. This call can for obvious reasons be extremely dangerous, and with poorly managed debuff slots like say having Curse of Recklessness up, but no Demo Shout, it can simply lead to the tank getting one-shot by Nefarian. Tanking this boss with a Paladin means you can ignore the warrior call completely, easing up the healing and reducing the risk involved with the increased damage taken. While this call isn't particularly dangerous for an experienced raiding guild, it is often the most dangerous call for more casual guilds, which is exactly the kind of guilds that would be taking a Paladin tank in the first place. Given the option between the different tank classes, I would choose a Paladin tank for this boss over a warrior tank any day. One thing I should mention is if you're tanking in phase 1, be aware that the Dragonkin coming out of the two doorways have different colors. These colors are black, red, green, blue and bronze, and you get 2 random colors each week. The ones that we need to be concerned about are the blue dragons, as they will mana burn players around them. If your assigned side gets a blue dragonkin, then call this out and switch position with one of the tanks on the other side of the room. Once the Nefarian lands, be in position already and get ready to pick him up. Coordinate with Dwarf Priest so they can keep Fear Wards on you for the entire boss fight, as a fear at a bad time can easily wipe the raid. You can also dispel one fear on yourself with a bubble macro should a need arise. Because Nefarian is such a long fight, I chose to go with Seal of Wisdom as my seal for this fight, instead of Seal of Righteousness. With a fast weapon like the one I'm using here, it lets me regenerate a little bit over 200 MP5 with Judgment of Wisdom on the boss. This means one Greater Blessing roughly every 3 seconds indefinitely, and I feel this is currently a stronger option for threat on prolonged boss fights over using SOR. Using this method also means you gain very little from spell power, and you can itemize more towards defense, armor and avoidance to reduce the incoming damage you take from the boss. Because Nefarian can also hit really hard, and you can take nearly 5000 damage from his Shadow Flame ability at the same time as a melee hit, you should make sure you have plenty of health as well, to avoid dipping dangerously low on health during a Shadow Flame and melee combo. It is also important that you try and maintain Holy Shield on cooldown. If mana is a concern, then rank 1 Holy Shield has the same amount of block chance as rank 3. The only difference between the two is rank 1 costs less mana and deals less holy damage when you block. For defensive purposes, rank 1 does just fine. Not only does using Holy Shield increase the threat output through blocking, but it also helps push off crushing blows from the boss when paired with readout procs from getting crit. Getting crit is just something that happens now and then, and I feel stacking defense on my gear to the point when I can no longer get crit simply means losing out on too many other stats, such as intellect for more Greater Kings and more Holy Shield. You also lose out on stamina, avoidance and additional armor, as the high defense pieces for Paladin tanks are often found in 5-man dungeons prior to raiding. One other thing you should be aware of, and this applies to all classes tanking Nefarian, is the rogue call. The rogue call will teleport every rogue in front of the boss and make them stuck in place for the duration of the call. It is important that you as the tank turn the boss away from the rogues to avoid them getting hit by Shadow Flame and Cleave. This also means the raid has to stand closer to Nefarian's back legs, so they are also not hit by Cleave and Shadow Flame once the boss is turned. Make sure to call out you are moving the boss so that everyone else can move accordingly. Once the rogue call ends, simply turn the boss back to its regular position once rogues have moved away. The final thing to be aware of on this fight is the third phase of the boss fight. This phase occurs when Nefarian reaches 20% health. He will then resurrect all the Draconids your raid killed in phase 1, and they will come back as weaker undead versions of themselves. The raid then needs to pick these up and AoE them down. What you need to make sure of here is that you stop casting Greater Blessing of Kings when the adds are about to spawn. If you keep casting Kings, every single ad will then target you and come running over to your position, where they will most likely get you killed. And this may result in a wipe if your off tanks are already moving off, attempting to pick up the ads. Once the ads have been dealt with, you can resume casting Kings, and the boss fight should end shortly after. Before ending this video, I just want to touch briefly on gear. I already talked about how you sometimes get crit, and about not going too overboard on defense. Defense is still a great stat, however, as it does give you quite a lot of avoidance and crit reduction. But I just want to make it clear that using defense gear often comes with a trade-off in form of losing other stats. How much defense you should be using will depend on the skill of your healers, the overall DPS of the raid, and your overall gear in general. I suggest you collect a lot of different pieces and just try different gear setups to figure out what works best for you. If you want an example of gear to use, here's what I was using on Nefarian while recording this video. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give tanking Nefarian a try and let me know how that goes. Holy Frog out.